I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Committee to order for March 1st, 2021. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Campbell, Camper, Crawford, Faison, Freeman, Gant, Garrett, Gillespie, Hawk, Hicks, Lamar, Lamberth, Lynn, Miller, Ogles, Sexton, Shaw, Sparks, Todd, Whitson, Williams, Wendell, Zachary, Vice Chairman Baum, Chairman Hazelwood. Madam Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Let the record indicate that Representative Hawk is stuck in traffic and trying his best to arrive as quickly as possible. Are there any personal orders or announcements this morning before we get started? Seeing none. We have a marathon today. We have a number of presentations scheduled, so I'm going to ask members and presenters to be as brief as possible while being thorough. And for those of you on the committee who have questions, we encourage those, but I'm asking that you be succinct with those and get directly to the question as quickly as possible. So members, you have the information on your dashboard for all the presentation documents. So with that, we are without objection, out of session and going into our presentations. And first up, we have the Department of Economic and Community Development with Commissioner Roth and his team. So if you would come forward, Commissioner.
Madam Chair, you could obviously we've got a live mic.
Yes.
Well, in the interest of everyone's time, good morning. My name is Bobby Roth, and I have the great privilege of serving as our Commissioner of Economic and Community Development for the state of Tennessee. To my right is Paul Vanderveer, one of our assistant commissioners, responsible for our senior policy and also operations. To my left is Alan Borden, our deputy chair or commissioner, and Alan is our responsible for new business development and rural development and just a whole host of other responsibilities. And then to Alan's left is Crystal Ivy. Crystal is responsible for our broadband initiative and has been in charge of that program for the last couple of years. And so to the chair, the vice chair, and the committee members, let me begin, if it's okay, with a brief 10-minute presentation, and then hopefully that'll give you as much time as necessary. That our job today is to not only tell the story, but also to answer any and all questions that are before you. So our job, as we all know, is to market the state of Tennessee. And it's really twofold. It's not only to recruit great companies and great brands to our state, but it's to make sure that those companies and their services, that they will consider Tennessee. So those elements are not only about expansion and business development, but it's also about rural and community development, and also one of the Accessibility Act. So we wanted to share a little bit about what COVID has meant to our department. I think the great news is we can say that we have remained open for the same time. We can tell you where we have experienced a little bit. You'll see here is these are the projects, and what we decided is we wanted to take a step out of 2020. And we're defining 2020 as our calendar year. So that's January 1 through December 31st. And what we wanted to do is give you a snapshot of our most recent report card, and then we wanted to level set it against the last 3 years using the 3-year average. And what you'll note here is that in 2020, we did land successfully 96 projects, about 14,400 new jobs. What we're probably the proudest of is an enormous amount of capital investment. It's in the neighborhood of $5.8 billion of private capital investment. What you'll also note is we did have a drop-off If you take the last 3 years, years 17, 18, and 19, and average them versus 2020, you'll see that we did have a drop off of about 26% when it comes to projects. And then I mentioned just a minute ago, the challenges we've had with our foreign direct investment projects. As you're aware, we have offices and representations in approximately 10 countries, 2 in Asia, and then 8 represented in Europe. And what you'll note here is that in 2020, 19 projects, down 49% based on the rolling average. We were able to land those 19 projects and 3,200 new jobs. As far as our rural projects, this is another important data point for us. As we all know, Governor Lee has asked our department to be laser focused on what we can do for our rural communities and counties across the state. And what you'll note here is in 2020, we did land 41 of the 96 projects were in rural counties, 5,700 jobs, about $2.7 billion of capital investment. Again, what you'll note, though, when we compare 2020 to the trailing 3 years, our project numbers were down 36%. And then broadband, you're very familiar. This has you guys were way ahead of the curve years ago when you created your Broadband Accessibility Act. And what you'll note here is, thanks to the CARES dollars, last year, $61 million was available for funding. Crystal and her team basically lit up 58,000 Tennesseans across 58 counties. I think what we've all discovered is with COVID, the real importance of the broadband. When I think of telecommuting and I think of e-commerce and small business and entrepreneurism and telemedicine, K through 12, it's the thought of not having broadband is just unfathomable. As far as our report card for 2020, 96 projects, 14,400 jobs, a $5.8 billion in CapEx. I can simply say the good news is when we compared that to 2019, and we know what a challenge 2020 was, our number of projects were only off slightly compared to 2019. The number of new jobs created were right on within just a matter of a couple of jobs. There's 9 regions across the state. And so not only do we have that team in place, and their sole responsibility is to work with companies that, as I mentioned at the outset, that call Tennessee home. And they're to make sure that these companies thrive, whether it's permitting, whether it's utilities, whether it's infrastructure, whatever we can do to make sure that their needs are taken care of. And then on top of that, here in Nashville, the group that rolls up under Alan Borden is our business development team. And these are teams that are specialized in automotive appliances. These are our pillars: distribution, third-party logistics, food and beverage, more recently, healthcare, life sciences, aerospace, chemicals, advanced materials, and then lastly, the HQ. And we know that is certainly a very coveted vertical. As far as what we're doing in our communities and our rural development initiatives in 2020, as we all know, when the pandemic arrived, the funding for our RIO program was cut to zero, but we had some carryover dollars and we were still able to make some headway and create some successes. And you can see there's our dashboard of the projects and the kinds of programs that we were able to support in 2020. As far as the 2022 cost increases, as we all know, Governor Lee mentioned at the State of the State, the $200 million broadband initiative. So that is a non-recurring one-time. And then we have our fast track grant program, of which he has proposed $95 million, and then the refunding of our RIO program to the tune of $21.1 million. As far as proposed reductions, these are the reductions that we did propose. These are the reductions. I can simply say this to you. These proposed reductions, we feel strongly that will not impact the quality of the work we do, not only at ECD, but the stakeholders across our state. And you can see they total $4.7 million rounding up. of which 3 million of that is coming out of our Fast Track grant program. As far as our 2021 vacancy reductions, you can see that we eliminated 4 positions and were successful in saving the state about $280,000. As far as 2022, we're going to remain lean, and we're going to do everything we can to, as we watch our economy reopen. What we can tell you is that as part of that reopening, one like we've not seen in a while, but nonetheless, that's to say that we're going to continue to do our job with 98 full-time positions. And ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our brief presentation from ECD and our team. We are prepared for your questions. Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Exciting things here, and I do have a number of questions. I'm sure we may have others as we go through. But first on my list, Chairman Baum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Rolfe, I've got a question or two about your Fast Track program. The proposed budget has $102 million allocated for that program, which is actually about the same as it's been in recent years. But most of this is one-time, non-recurring funding. I think only $7 million of this amount is recurring funding. And a couple of years ago, that recurring amount was higher. It was, I think, $25 million.
Yes, sir.
How does this shift in funding for this program from recurring to non-recurring affect how effective the program can be?
Well, Mr. Vice Chair, the good news is, thanks to your support, we have been able to fund every project that we've pursued. You are correct. Up until, I think, a year ago, there was a $25 million recurring revenue component. We've always advocated for more of that. At the same time, we recognize the way the budgets are put together. And so we are now down to $7 million of recurring. I can tell you this, that we have been able to work with F&A and always make these numbers work. You'll also note there's a supplemental amount that there's a special project out there we're pursuing, and I can say that this is the way the funding formulary has been presented to us, and so we are doing everything we can. It has not disrupted our ability to do business, sir, so far.
Okay, that's good. I guess I asked the question because it seems like a lot of these projects are projects that have a duration of more than 1 year. It's going to take more than 1 year for a project to reach completion. So how are you able to plan ahead for these multi-year projects when your funding seems non-recurring and on a year-by-year basis for the Fast Track program?
So, Mr. Vice Chair, we have a pay-as-you-go mindset at ECD. And what we mean by that is you're correct. You'll see that every year we roll forward several buckets worth of a lot of capital. And when we incent a project, we fund it up front as opposed to making a multiple year commitment. And that allows us to cross our T's and dot our I's and be successful. And you're right, these projects, some of them will take 5, 6, or 7 years to be fully funded. But we've been very comfortable putting that capital up front and making that commitment as opposed to delivering a whole host of multi-year commitments that would create all kinds of challenges for you as our funding partner.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Next on my list, Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, welcome to you and your team. And I'd like to also welcome Sammy Arnold. We all know he's the engine behind ECD, and you got him in the back, so we'd like to give him a special welcome. He's back there in the back, being humble back there. Commissioner, just want to talk a little bit about broadband.
Yes,
we had a good meeting last week, and I appreciate you and your team and Leader Gant pulling that together and just the time we were able to spend just regarding clarity. But can you speak to just the number, the $200 million number? I know the expectation from your department was a probably a lower number, and the governor and his budget had proposed $200 million. And based on what's been spent over the last couple of years, and that $200 million, I know there's been some questions about, is there even a demand for $200 million? Can you just speak to that specifically and the demand of that $200 million, and if that's an annual an annual spend, we're going to spend that now, or if you see that being spread out over the next couple of years.
Yes, sir. So Representative, that 200 million, you're right, that is a moonshot approach, which we are delighted to. I think the thinking behind the governor's proposal is that what do we need today that over the next couple of years will allow us to light up every home across our rural 80 counties. And so that is based on the data today that there are 500 or so thousand Tennesseans that have inadequate broadband. Whether they have, when I say inadequate, sir, I'm talking about, and you would know these data points, but at least broadband that has enough bandwidth to allow telemedicine, to allow telemarketing, telecommuting, anything and everything when it comes to education. So Crystal Ivy is our all broadband person, sir. And so Crystal, do you have some thoughts and comments about the 200 million and what that time frame looks like to put those dollars to work? And will that be enough to light up Tennessee?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Representative. So in terms of the demand that you asked about for the 200 million, in the first couple of years of the grant program, you're right, we've typically had appropriated about 15 or $20 million or so. And the demand has far exceeded the amount of funding that we've had available. Typically, we fund about a quarter to a third of the grant applications that we receive every year. So certainly the program continues to be very popular, and I think there continues to be a demand there. With the $200 million, we did a calculation based on the number of Tennesseans lacking broadband today and how much approximately we've spent to fund the homes that we've served in the first few years of the program. We came to about $400 to $500 million that it would take to serve the rest of the state with broadband access. The current process that we use now for the grant program is that we require a 50-50 match from our broadband providers. So we do require a pretty significant skin in the game from the broadband companies themselves. And so that's kind of how we came from the 400 million down to the 200 million, is that we'd like to continue to require a match from the broadband providers.
Madam Chair, a few more, if I may.
Certainly.
Thank you. And then also, how much federal money are we receiving related to broadband? Because you had said, I think you said, did you say $400 million roughly would hit just about everybody?
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
sir.
how much are we receiving from the federal government in addition to what the 200 we're doing? How much from the federal government?
So of that 400 to 500 million total, with this 200 million proposal, with the federal government, we recently, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, they announced $150 million that is available to broadband providers in Tennessee over the next 6 to 10 years, depending on how the build-outs work, if they are to meet certain benchmarks. So that's about $150 million that'll be available or so. And then there's another 100 million or so that we've received from USDA, who also awards for broadband funding, as well as the Appalachian Regional Commission and some other programs.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And I just want this to be said for the record. We in our meeting last week, we had talked about underserved versus unserved, and the goal of utilizing these resources to make sure we're providing some level of broadband access to everyone. And so I think it's extremely important as we walk forward, speaking from a perspective, I've got fiber to my home. I'm in a very urban area, but looking at more rural areas, and I've got multiple colleagues that serve rural communities just sitting here right beside me. If the goal is to provide broadband access to everyone, we have to redefine what underserved and unserved is. Unserved right now, based on our conversations, am I correct in saying that unserved, you would classify anybody with 10 meg or less as being unserved?
Yes, sir. That's the statutory definition that runs the program. Yes, sir.
And so I think it's extremely important that we look at this from an unserved perspective, and we have to operate from a new definition of unserved. Because again, if I go to anybody who has no broadband access now, and I tell them I could get you 6 meg DSL, I tell you, I could get you a wireless connection with 8 meg down, 4 meg up with an SLA that guarantees 99.9% uptime. Anybody I go to, they would be able to do telemedicine. They'd be able to do email. They'd be able to do homework. Now, they can't stream Netflix on 4 TVs and stream music, obviously. But again, we're talking about a rural community, ensuring that we provide access. And so the last thing we want to do with $350 million is run fiber to every home, which is not cost effective, run fiber to homes in rural communities, try to run coax to every one of these communities when we have, as we talked about before, when we have technology through a Windstream, which is line of sight that is used in rural communities. It's used right here in downtown Nashville. And ECD can play a vital role in pulling large entities together. Windstream and Iris, who is the largest fiber transport provider in Tennessee. They have more dark fiber in the ground than anybody in the state, and it is a Tennessee company. They only serve Tennessee. And so we have to be really outside the box, and we cannot stick to standard definitions that were put in place and would be applicable 5-10 years ago, because we're in a new emerging world with emerging technology. Starlink's another. There's so many different ways to approach this. And while from a traditional perspective, $400 to $500 million may have been the number a few years ago, we can take $350 million. And if we utilize that the right way and pull the right partners in and look at the definitions differently that are defined now, cover everybody plus some. Plus utilizing that to upgrade. I know some of these providers are wanting to use this to upgrade existing networks, and that can be part of it. But I believe that, almost like with our vaccination rollout, that has to be 1B, and we have to look at one served and changing the definition and going to those in Johnny Shaw's district, William Lambert's district, who got nothing. If that's the goal, we got to bring them something. And if it's not 10 meg, that's okay, because this is a work in progress. And so thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted that on the record. Crystal, thank you for your work, and thank you for all that you're doing to help people in our state.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you. Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The proposed budget includes $400,000 for fiscal year 21 as a supplemental as it relates to Tenvesco. And I wanted to ask you, why is that $400,000 needed, that additional $400,000?
I'm going to defer, sir. That's a good question to Paul Vandermeer about this, but these are some of the leftover tax credits that were created when that program was initially created 11 years ago. So Paul Vandermeer, please.
Representative Paul Vandermeer. The insurance companies bought $200 worth of tax credits a number of years ago. They are finishing cashing those in at this point. There's about 400,000 left for them to cash in. As they cash those in, those are funded through that money to our budget that goes back to the Department of Revenue to cover those.
And what are the additional outstanding tax credit obligations at this point?
That's it at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chairman Hicks.
Thank you, Chair Lady and Commissioner. It's certainly good to see you and your friends. I would have already bragged on Sammy, but unfortunately, Chairman Zachary beat me to it. So certainly good to see everybody. Just got a quick question. When looking at some of the things maybe that I just quite frankly don't see in this budget, is last year the $174,000 for the development districts. I think most of us understand and know the vital role that these development districts play in our communities. And so, of course, the 174 was left out last year. We put it back in there, non-recurring, and then I don't see it in there again. Is that correct? And just curious, maybe why that was not included.
Yes, sir. So the development districts last year, when the world did stop, we did have to, we were faced with some very hard decisions. And so we did reduce the funding there. As you just stated, it was refunded. I can simply share with you that this was what the governor had recommended, sir, in the budget.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I certainly look forward to trying to make sure that we can make that amount whole again. So, yes, but thank you very much. Thank you.
Chairman Todd.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate you guys being here, and we appreciate what you do for the state. I had one project that's noted at a $50 million unidentified project. Just not asking what it is, but will we know what that is prior to the budget finalization?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Well, Commissioner, I don't see any other questions other than mine. So if other people have questions, then please let me know. But first of all, in your presentation on the things that you're reducing, there was the membership in the ARC. So what did that buy us and what do we lose? Or are we totally a non-member now, or
Yes,
help me understand how that works?
Yes,
'Cause
ma'am.
we
So-
get a lot of things through the ARC, as I recall.
Right, and they are a great federal partner. And what we did was we looked at what their funding dues have historically allowed. And so the short answer is when we took the last 3 years of their dues fluctuate year over year. And so we found that, for example, we may budget $1, and then when we finally get our dues bill, it's 95 cents. And I'm just making that up for the point of the conversation. What we're talking about here is we have cut some dollars out of there, but that will not cut services. And those would have just, again, because those funding partners, their dues change every year. We've got enough money in the budget to make sure that we don't cut services and we meet those obligations.
That's very comforting. I got a little nervous when I saw the reduction for the dues in the ARC, because again, I do know from my past experience in your organization that there are a number of projects that involve the ARC. Another thing that I don't see in the budget is SBIR funding for Launch Tennessee. And I know I have been, maybe some of my colleagues on this committee might have been receiving a number of emails from folks who are interested, who've either gotten that sort of funding in the past, they qualify for that funding. It does bring with it a federal, I think, 1-to-1 match. So can you tell me why it disappeared?
Yes, ma'am. So, Madam Chair, that is part of our Launch Tennessee, our early stage ecosystem partner that you guys have funded forever for us. And so we thank you for that. That reduction, we had originally recommended that, but that was a reduction that came from the governor's office and the F&A team.
Well, as Chairman Hicks mentioned on the development districts, that's something that I look forward with this committee to perhaps restoring in the budget, because I think, number one, it's money well spent. And number two, we have, as I understand, a number of businesses in the pipeline, small businesses who would qualify for these funds, who have proven their capability to use them when we're in an environment where small business is really under attack from all the results of a pandemic, then finding ways to help those folks be successful seems to me to be an important function of Launch Tennessee, and just of, as a previous governor always said, the state doesn't create jobs, but what we can do is create an environment for those jobs to be created. And it seems to me that SBIR is a good tool to have in that toolbox. So again, to beat that dead horse, we'll look at, with the help of this committee, perhaps restoring some of that funding. Then a favorite question for some of us who've been here a while, I only came in 14, but beginning in 2008, the state started funding the mega site in West Tennessee. And I believe to this point, we've spent $170 million, but, somewhere round figures, in getting that site up and ready to go. And as I recall last year, the question was asked because we put in an additional, I can't remember if it was 20 million for wastewater treatment. And the question was asked, and I know it was asked because I asked it, is this the last? Is this all there's going to be? And this time I see that there's another $15 million included in the governor's budget, and it's identified as cost of the wastewater project. So I'm assuming that's some kind of increase over what we initially thought the cost was going to be. Can you help us, number one, understand the need for the additional $15 million? And then number two, just kind of give us an update on the mega site and the marketing of that and when we might begin to see some return on that investment.
Yes, ma'am. So, Madam Chair, to date, the General Assembly has funded or appropriated $175 million. To date, the state has spent $90 million. And so this additional $15 proposal is to shore up some of the potential expenses that would be incurred in developing a wastewater sewer system. As we all know, Alan Borden and I we've traveled the globe recruiting potential companies to come to the mega site. Unfortunately, to date, our batting average remains at 0. Nonetheless, in 2020, we were able to show, if you will, those assets to over 30 potential prospects. So we continue to aggressively market the mega site. I think one of the challenges that the governor's office has struggled with, as they have done everything they can to learn as much about the mega site in a short 2-year period, what is the next step? And what I mean by that, Madam Chair, is do we push forward and build a wastewater pipeline to the Mississippi? And do we go ahead and begin the construction of a wastewater treatment facility at the campus? The challenge there is that's an enormous cost. That's in excess of $100 million. And so the question is, do we do that first before we're successful in landing our first tenant? Or do we wait until we can identify the exact wastewater uses and needs of that first potential tenant? And so I think that's part of the conversation. I think the best news is Governor Lee and his team have engaged all of less than 60 days ago, a site consultant team to provide a SWOT analysis that's independent and objective. And so that exercise is underway as we speak. I can tell you that our challenges in marketing the mega site, one data point that I'm not sure we've ever really focused on, we being ECD, is that there are about 28 other mega sites within our region that we compete against. And so if that's the case, when a company's coming to the Southeast for the sake of this conversation, they're going to address what other shovel-ready sites are available in the marketplace. And unfortunately, we have other mega sites that are shovel-ready. Now, when we debate, if you will, what is described as shovel-ready, we would argue we have the funding and the resources in hand that we can and will be shovel-ready when that asset is ready to come online, or that manufacturing plant. So we feel like we've done a lot of things, including, as you know, getting the proper permitting, and then all of those easements, all those private easements where the pipeline is going to run across private property. So we would argue we've made and completed all those tasks, and we're good to go there. Again, I think what the governor's office is trying to determine is, before we start spending those kinds of dollars, let's back up a minute and let's identify what that first user's demands are going to be. And I think that's probably where there have been the challenges. The good news is that it does represent all 4,100 acres. It's an enormous piece of property that does present a lot of great attributes.
And could you give us an idea on the timing of the study? It seems that it would be useful to have the results of that study prior to determining if we're going to invest another $15 million, at this point. So do you have a...
Yes, ma'am. So the task order that was released by General Services, I believe it was a 100-day task order. And while the site consultant said that they would have that report ready inside of 100 days, I can share with you that they continue to work diligently to wrap up that work. But I think they've been very mindful of trying to be factual about gathering all of the information and all of the facts.
Okay, and I probably just didn't listen closely enough, but what was the start date for the 100-day? What is the completion
So
date?
January 6th was the date that the task order was signed by General Services.
Okay, so we should have the results of that study again to a point made earlier prior to the final approval of
Yes,
the
ma'am.
budget.
Yes,
All right.
ma'am.
Thank you. Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming. Just as a follow-up to her discussion, this task order that you did, does it incorporate any background data as it relates to employees, workforce, as it relates to if you were to land someone there? The reason why I'm concerned about it is that there are other large projects outside of our state borders that seem to be pulling a population base outside of our state in order to fill those jobs. If we do not have the jobs within a 50-mile radius of the 4,100 acre site, that would also give me some concern as to whether or not we could fulfill the commitments to the state to whoever that person is. The question is, will the study include a workforce availability component?
The answer, sir, is yes, and it will include an analysis within a 60-mile radius of the mega site, sir.
Okay.
Chairman Williams.
One other follow-up. You stated that there were $174 million plus some change that has already been committed by the General Assembly as it relates to the expenses there. But then you said 90 million of that had not yet been allocated or committed.
I'm sorry. No, sir, 90 million has been spent.
Okay.
So you've allocated about 175 million, of which Stream has actually spent, which is General Services real estate team, right at $90 million.
So my assumption is then the balance of the revenues, excess of $80 million, are committed to particular projects, but the money is not yet spent.
Yes, sir. So 85 million has been appropriated that's not spent. And then Governor Lee has proposed another 15 million, so that at the end of the day, we would have $100 million that would be allocated, and that number would represent enough capital to build out this wastewater program that we're talking about.
If the study came back and it said that it wasn't based upon the 28 other sites that we're competing against, if it came back and said it wasn't a good decision to continue to spend that money, could that $100 million be reverted back to other state agencies or policies, or is it committed in such a fashion where we couldn't get the money back?
Sir, you raise a great question, and unfortunately, I don't have while I've been with the state 4 years, I don't have I would refer us to F&A. Paul, do you have any comments about that, or that's an F&A question?
Yeah, I think what would have to happen there, the legislature appropriate that money, it's in the capital budget. I would think you would probably have to take an action to change the purpose of that funds.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And just to follow up and just to be clear in my own mind, so we have spent $90 million. We have $175 million allocated. But of that other additional $85 million, it's not obligated in any way at this point?
Well, it is, Paul, would you say it's budgeted for the mega site project, but it has not been spent?
There are no contracts or pending contracts
Yes,
for work?
you are correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Representative Sexton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. My question may somewhat not be for your department, but my concern is the businesses that we already have. And now, of course, you've got business expansion. One of the things that we're facing right now in our country as we see a changing world before us is raw materials are becoming allocated. The supply chain has been disrupted. And there's many of our current businesses that are facing layoffs, not because they don't have orders, but because they can't get raw material. The shipment coming from overseas has tripled in price. Petroleum In my business, we use foam rubber, which is a petroleum-based component. And price, within the last few months, we've had like 4 price increases. Lumber is an extreme shortage. We've got all of these things going on, and I'm just wondering what, if anything, that your department could do in helping sustain these businesses that are struggling right now. As I said, not because they don't have orders, and not because people don't work, but simply because the raw materials are just becoming a shortage. Part of that has to do with some of the executive decisions that's going on in Washington, cutting off the pipeline for fuel and different things. And I'm seeing a tremendous burden now placed upon existing businesses and what they're going to do about this. And this is not just a small business. Large and small alike are facing some tremendous decisions on how to handle this and get through this crisis that we're in.
Yes, sir. So supply chain, as you know, is enormously important to our state and our state's economy. And you are correct. Where the supply chain depends on foreign raw materials.
And if I might just add, we want to do business in America, but over the past few years, many of those raw materials, you cannot get them in America. They have to come from abroad.
I can say from a macro perspective, sir, there is an initiative across several industries of trying to reshore or bring back these jobs and the raw materials required. I can tell you most recently where we're feeling that impact in the state and a very large scale is supply chain for the OEMs. So in the advanced manufacturing, the automobile industry, we all read recently that there is a real shortage of microchips. And as we know today, just about, every car and every electronic whatever is run through using these chips. It's a real problem, sir. And the question is, how do you solve it? And through executive orders or mandates, how do you get there? And how do we get there sooner rather than later? Because you are right. In that particular case, we know Tennessee is home to close to 1,000 automotive suppliers. It's about 150,000 Tennesseans at work in this supply chain. So it's very real to us as well. How do we at ECD solve for? I can tell you what we learned a couple of years ago, and that is that trade policy was made at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And unfortunately, no matter what we were able to communicate or articulate, now remember, when 1 out of 3 projects we recruit are foreign direct investment companies, there are about 32 countries that call Tennessee home. And so I can tell you that what you've observed and stated is very real. And then the question is, what can we do to support these companies? And I can promise you, we are doing everything we can. But when it comes to the actual assembling of some of these raw materials that are created on foreign soil, that one, unfortunately, we won't be solving in the short term, sir.
Thank you, madam. My business model is also involves OEMs, and I think it's the greatest crisis that we're facing right now is raw materials. And we could see hundreds and thousands of business that will collapse if something is not done very soon. The price increases are real. They're going up almost weekly, and it's just a matter of time before that we price ourselves out of the market. So I had meetings just this week when I went back home, and with all of our customers, everybody is in a turmoil. Plywood has gone from $20-something a sheet to over $40-something a sheet, and that's if you can get it. Mm-hmm. So I think economically speaking, for our businesses, we have to focus on the here and now. And the future, of course, is important, but how do we weather this storm? Because we've got a real storm on our hands. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chairman Todd.
Thanks, Chairman. Commissioner, I appreciate the allocation that previous General Assemblies have made and for the governor's commitment to placing an equal focus on the economic development in West Tennessee. The success of this project is vital to our Western Grand Division, as you well know, and we want to be efficient and effective in how we secure a tenant for this area. I have learned a great deal. We've had many conversations, and I have with your staff, and I've learned a great deal about how this has progressed over the years. And I want to continue my involvement in making the best use of this property for the constituents of our state. I think it's vital, again, to our economic well-being in West Tennessee. And I appreciate the dedication that your department has made in this area, and look forward to continuing, again, that effort. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I believe Chairman Williams, you had a follow-up question?
Yes, I'm sorry. Just a follow up to the Chairman Baum's original question about fast track monies. I don't know if you said this. I was just wondering, as somebody that's in business development myself, I like the idea of knowing there's reoccurring dollars out there that I can invest. It does seem like over the last several years, we've taken fast track money, moved it from reoccurring dollars to non-reoccurring dollars. There is some volatility in doing that. I personally think, especially when we're making so many investments in 95 counties across the state as it relates to this money. Are you concerned at all about this being reoccurring or focusing more on non-recurring money than reoccurring money as it relates to fast track, or it doesn't matter to you?
Well, no, sir. We would love for as much recurring dollars to be in that fast track bucket, but we also recognize the demands on capital across the state and the decisions that you guys are faced with. So the short answer is, while we would love more, we accept the amount. But I think what I want to articulate to this group is we have not ever had a project where this body has not been supportive and provided the resources through supplementals or capital grants, sir. So we're grateful for that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I do know that Alan and his team is working diligently across the state to try to deploy these revenues. And so I have some trepidation that this divergence from reoccurring dollars to non-reoccurring dollars, in particularly when we have a year where financially we can't supplement it with non-reoccurring money and keep the numbers as high as they have been in the past. And so that's something I'm going to continue to look at, but I do think it's in our best interest to have them, even if less in reoccurring dollar than non-recurring.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, you had said originally, I think in the original response to Chairman Baum, that as rightly you should, if you make a commitment to a company and the company is going to take, their first year's infrastructure, their second year is equipment purchasing, their third year is they're finally training. So you have a 3-year commitment with fast track dollars that you go ahead and set those aside. So help me understand how that works if you have only $7 million recurring dollars and you have a project that is $15 million overall. Kind of walk us through that.
Sure. So Madam Chair, in the current, what's proposed before you, as the governor has presented, $95 million would be non-recurring fast track, along with the other 7 that is recurring. So that would provide us a bank account, if you will, of $107 million. And so we use those dollars to make the commitments. Now, the great news about how we do this in Tennessee is that when we're recruiting companies, our formulary is based on a per net new job being created. And so if a company comes to Tennessee and says, we're going to create, for the sake of this conversation, 1,000 new jobs, and if our average fast track commitment for the sake of this conversation is $5,000 per net new job, that I believe is a $5 million commitment. So we would make that commitment. The company would sign an accountability agreement. So they would be legally bound as they take down those dollars. These are reimbursable dollars. So they have to spend the money first, and then they come to the state and ECD to be reimbursed. And then some of these projects take a couple of years to construct. And so those we fund based on when they present their reimbursement documents. The great news is we've historically been a pay as you go, which is something we feel has been successful. Other states have different formularies, and probably the one that is most competitive are states that have personal income taxes. And believe it or not, a company will come to their state, and if they calculate what that individual's personal income tax is over a 10-year period, the state will collect that person's personal income taxes and then rebate those dollars to that company over a 10-year period. And I don't want to get too technical, but I can just tell you that just strikes us as offensive. And I'm sorry, but why should my employees be funding my incentives that are going to the state so they can come back to my employer? And I'm not going to debate that for this conversation, but I can say right now, what you've allowed us to, what you funded and how the program works today, we've had an enormous amount of success in continuing to allow Tennessee to lead the Southeast when it comes to the creation of new jobs.
Thank you. And I don't have any further questions on my list, but I want to thank you all for the job that you've done. I think given the circumstances of this year, seeing while there were some negative percentages and in terms of measuring against past years, I certainly would count 2020 very successful for Tennessee. And I know that's because of the great work that you all have done, and hopefully because some of the work that we have done as a General Assembly and as administration to give you the tools that you need to do that. So we look forward to continuing to work with you to bring jobs to all of Tennessee, all of our grand divisions. We just want to make sure that we use the dollars. They are not our dollars, they're taxpayer dollars, and we want to make sure that we use those in the best way possible to get the best return on investment for all Tennesseans. And I know that you all work hard every day to make sure that happens. So thank you again.
Madam Chair, one final closing, if I could.
Certainly.
On behalf of the 100 colleagues I work with every day at ECD, I can tell you we ask every one of them to be forward-facing and be customer-focused. And with the pandemic, the good news is we were able to not miss a beat, except the numbers are down. What I can just leave you with as far as a closing observation is really on or about January 1st of this year, it's like the world is starting to reopen again. Now, we've got some challenges, as the representative talked about, with supply chain, but the pipeline, ladies and gentlemen, may be as robust as it's been the last couple of years. So we look forward to hopefully doing our job, and we thank you for the funding or consideration for this funding proposal.
Thank you again. And again, I think that pipeline, hopefully the things that have been done in Tennessee to make us a very business-friendly state are paying off in terms of, I've read an article or a number of articles actually about Tennessee being attractive. Not only retirees are interested in coming here because we have no income tax, but also just because of the business climate that again, the legislature as a whole, working with this administration and the ones before it, have worked together to perpetuate in Tennessee, so that we're hoping that we're helping you bring that business, and not only bring it and have them knock on the door, but have them sign on the dotted line. So we look forward to hearing from you next year about all the great successes in 2021 from that pent-up demand. But thank you so much for being with us. We're going to give our folks just a minute to do our sanitizing of the mics and before we move on to our next presenter. And that will be the Department of Transportation. I heard. the conversation seems to be quickly deteriorating, so I will, I will call us back. Call us back to order and welcome the folks from the Department of Transportation who are here this morning. Thank you for joining us on a Monday morning. And Commissioner, whoever's going to start off, just feel free to begin. And I would ask each of you, if you have different speakers, if you would just identify yourself for the record before you begin to speak the first time. So with that, Commissioner. I'm not sure your mic is on.
It says off. Is that working now? Okay. Chair Lady Hazelwood, thank you for allowing us to be here this morning to present our budget. As this is a FY22 budget presentation, I would like to have Joe Galbato go through that with you. To my right, though, is Mr. Paul Deggs, our Chief Engineer. Joe Galbato, to my left, is Chief Financial Officer, so you recognize these faces. One face you may not recognize this morning is Mr. Preston Elliott. He came to work for us on April 20th of last year, and he heads up our environmental and long-range planning. So he's new to our team, so we welcome him to it. And so at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Galbato. Joe?
All right. Good morning. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee. So we'll try to make this as quick as possible to allow plenty of time for questions. So are you guys going to work the slides for us?
I can. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So our first slide is a high-level look at the variances, fiscal 21 versus fiscal 22. As you can see, on the federal side, we will be down $6 million. On the state side, we'll be up almost $114 million. And on the local revenue side, we'll be about the same. So the next three slides, we will talk about the variances in a little bit more detail. On the federal side, pretty simple to understand. So the CARES Act has some spillover funds from fiscal 20 to fiscal 21. There's no such spillover in fiscal 22, therefore the variance. On the state side, a little more busy, but worth talking about. So our state user fees, the user fees are defined as gas, diesel, special petroleum, and vehicle registration. They will be down year over year about $23 million. So when the funding board put all the projections together in fiscal 21, we felt that they were a little bit aggressive. And I actually will discuss more of that in about 2 slides, and you'll see what we're talking about. The number that they put forth for fiscal 22 seems to be much more reasonable, and again, we'll talk about that in 2 slides. The next 3 bullet points talk about the 3 initiatives that the governor wanted as far as general fund infusions into Tdot. He wanted $85 million into our rail program, $40 million into our aeronautics program, and $10 million in the Aeronautics Economic Development Fund. And then on the local slide, again, local revenue will be about the same year over year based on the projects that we think are going to come in. So if we go to the next slide, which is the reasonability slide. So I know this slide's a bit busy, but I can take you through it to make it very, very clear. We put fiscal 20 up there because that 2 months of COVID impact to Tdot. And then you see our budgets for 21 and proposed for 22. So let's take a look at gasoline first. So we received $509 million in fiscal 19. It dropped to $505 in fiscal 20 because we had 2 months of impact due to COVID. If as you remember, the Improve Act caused a phase in of user fees for gas, diesel, propane, and natural gas. Had there not been any COVID impact in fiscal 20, gasoline probably would have been closer to to 525 million, which is a little bit less than what the budget called for 21. The funding board, as you can see, in fiscal 22 has dropped the numbers from 534 to 514 in recognition of COVID. We are concerned about that number just because as of today, our gas is trending toward 480 million or so. On the diesel side, the good news is diesel really was not impacted by COVID at all. The 186 million that you saw in fiscal 19 grew to 210 million in fiscal 20. We would expect it because of the 3-cent increase on diesel, it would have gone to 211, so essentially right on. As far as the budget for 2021 at 217 million, we're trending right toward that number now. So the funding board keeping it the same in fiscal 22 is a bit conservative, but actually will help offset some of the aggressive numbers in gas. The special petroleum number, that is the 1.4 cent fee. You have 1 cent fee on petroleum and all volatile fuels and a 4/10 environmental insurance fee for underground storage tank regulation. That's always hanging in the mid-30s, and that's where it's at. On vehicle registration, it was also impacted by COVID. You can see in fiscal 19, $286 million came to Tdot. It dropped to 278, not because vehicles were not around, but because there was a delay and a spillover of some of the vehicle registration fees into fiscal 21. And fiscal 21's numbers reflect that spillover as well as normal collections, so it should be fine. The beer and bottle tax is always somewhere between 6 and 7 million, so that continues. And then on the Transportation Equity Fund, you can see the giant increase in fiscal 20. So that 65 million is composed of a one-time payments from two particular railroads on the old taxes, the old excise, the new excise tax and the old sales tax. That was 39 million. Without that 39 million, that 65 becomes 26, 24 on air and 2 on rail. On the next slide, this is the brag slide we like to tout. At Tdot, we only spend about 2% or less on administration, and anywhere between 86 and 92% of our fund and our spending goes back to the citizens of Tennessee in the form of construction, maintenance, or grants. So we want to move forward. Next few slides, we'll talk a little bit on the federal side so you can understand where we stand today. On the FAST Act, as you remember last year, we didn't expect them to pass a long-term bill, and they didn't do that. I want to impart on the committee that long-term funding is imperative for not just Tennessee, but all state transportation departments, because it helps us with our continuity of project planning. But as your chief financial officer, I would say just as important, if not more important, is stable and reliable funding. So in Washington, the Highway Trust Fund today gives out more than it takes in. If it gives out more than it takes in, at some point it requires one-time arbitrary general fund infusions. In September of 20, it required $14 billion. It's estimated that to do another long-term bill, it could be upwards of $100 billion of general fund money coming in, which is sizable. But be that as it may, we are all hoping for a long-term funding package, and we wanted to focus on formula funding rather than one-time arbitrary grants. And then last, we always like to thank the legislature, previous legislatures, our previous governors, and our current governor for keeping us debt-free. As one of only 5 states that's debt-free, it makes it much more easy to manage, and we don't have to take the first dollars to support debt payments. All right, so as you all know, we're funded federally by federal highway, federal transit, and federal aviation. The CARES Act did not give any money to federal highway, but they did give money to federal transit and federal aviation. So this slide talks about what happened. So on the CARES Act side for transit, $232 million came to Tennessee, and the vast majority of that came to the big cities, Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, and Chattanooga. But 195 came to our small urban and rural transit agencies. And it was used, the intent was to use it for operating expenses. Obviously, with fare box revenues being down, they needed something to keep them going, and that's what CARES Act did. The next slide, actually the same scenario happens with federal aviation. 125 million came to the state of Tennessee for aviation, most of that to the major air carrier airports. But about 4.5 million came to us for the general aviation folks. They use it for operating expenses, but they can also use it for the federal match. So, as I said, we got nothing as far as federal highway from the CARES Act, but this backstop funding, the latest coronavirus thing, gave us some money. Now, we want to be very careful with everybody so that they understand this is not stimulus. This is not money on top to do extra things. This is to fill the gap that for us losing our state user fees. So as I said before, we collected fewer dollars in fiscal 20 than we had anticipated because of Corona. That was $33 million. Right now, we're anticipating that we will be down from budget about $75 million. We think that will continue in fiscal 22 as well. So when all is said and done, fiscal 20, 21, and 22, we will be down anywhere from $180 million to $220 million. So this is just to fill the void. So cuts that we would have had to make, whether it's to projects, whether it's to different programs, will be able to be alleviated by that. I thought I would turn it over to Commissioner Paul on this next slide if they want to just mention a little bit about where we want to spend our $187 million.
So one of the things Mr. Gilbato had mentioned that we had a budget that was prepared prior to COVID hitting for the current fiscal year, or for the last fiscal year and the current fiscal year. So we had to actually go through and make cuts in our budget. So we looked at several areas in the department. One was just in our routine maintenance area. So some of the routine maintenance activities we do, grass mowing, for instance, we cut a cycle out of our grass mowing for the calendar year 21, grass mowing contracts. We also looked at we had a small structures or small culvert replacement program. Those, things 6 and 8 foot wide culverts under roads and stuff like that, and just some odds and ends. So it was about $10 million that we cut out of that budget. So one of the things we were doing with some of those cuts is trying to restore areas that we cut. We also, we had a transit capital grant assistance program, and we worked with the transit providers in Tennessee, and we're able to put these dollars back into these programs to help do with when some of the one-time money came back in. So in the large MPOs, if you recall on the previous slide, got a $22 million infusion under this legislation. And so we used the same formula to put to the small MPO. So there's about 8 small MPOs across the state that we were able to put about $4 million toward those. $58 million of it we're going to put to just the traditional large projects that you see us letting, the Cumberland County State Route 28, US 127. We just opened bids and awarded in February as an example of a project like that. But we also wanted to look at where are we having some areas to where state of good repair is an issue. So we're looking at some of the large bridges, primarily on the interstate system, these are Improve Act projects as well. And so we're going to tackle a couple of those. And then we've got some concrete rehabilitation in Memphis, for instance, on the north side of Memphis on I-40. We have some concrete pavement that, if you've driven through there, it is reminiscent of what I-440 maybe looked like. Over in Knoxville, a piece of 640. And just most of our system has an asphalt roadway, but when concrete pavement gets to the end of its useful life, you have to put a much larger investment in. So we want to do some of that with those. And then about $20 million for safety type projects out there. We do get a fair amount of safety funds a year, but through the federal program, but it has very stringent criteria. And so we have many locations across the state that are frankly small projects, probably in the $100,000 to $200,000 range, that are just scattered in really every county of the state. And so we want to take some of these dollars and address some of those safety issues on the transportation network. But again, so as backstop funding here, we're trying to basically make ourselves whole. And again, the dollars going to the MPOs, similarly, the cities in those MPOs and those counties are short, or have been coming up short as well.
All right, thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Joe, would you like to finish up on a few items?
Sure. So we'll go to the last slide. Hopefully that'll spark some additional discussion. I want to point out, we wear it like a badge where we say fix it first. The old adage where you don't put in a pool in your home when your roof is leaking. So in 2020, we put $360 million toward bridge repair and resurfacing. We increased that to $430 million in the current year because Paul's engineering staff analyzed, and to keep it in the same state it was the previous year was going to require more work. So we do that, and we put our money where our mouth is. We were very disturbed on the second bullet point on the fatalities continue to grow on our roadways, up 90 or so every year. It's not acceptable. On the headcount reduction, we did comply with the legislative directive. We reduced 20 heads at Tdot based on that. I'll remind you all that we reduced 63 a couple years ago for the same ask. But in addition to that, we continue to give heads to different state agencies for the shared service initiative. So the Department of Human Resources received 6 of our headcount for the transactional personnel. STS received 16 of our personnel for the workstation consolidation folks, and Department of Finance and Administration received 25 of our heads for the centralized accounting initiative. We're in good weather today, but a couple weeks ago it wasn't so good. So if you have any questions on snow and ice updates, Paul's got plenty of information on that. And we want to be very upfront here on maintaining services during COVID. We're very proud of what we did in our regions and our districts. Our construction folks, our maintenance folks, the help truck operators who are helping people on the road continued just as normal, but we had safety protocols in place. So rather than have 3, 4, 5 people in a vehicle, we might have only had 1, maybe 2. We had cleaning supplies, we had PPE, so we did the best we could. We think we've done a good job. And I want to brag on our information technology folks. For the folks like myself and administration across the street, when the governor gave the directive along with commissioner to go home, went home and pretty much conducted business as usual, or as the new usual. Many other departments of transportation across the country were just trying to grapple to get computers back. So we were proud of our folks. And then I think, we have a big focus on safety, and I know Commissioner wants to talk about that. So with that, I guess we'll turn it over to the committee and answer any questions you've got.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. So Commissioner, did you want to talk about the safety prior to questions?
Yes, ma'am. I'll just briefly touch on that. It won't take but a minute. As Joe said, the road fatalities continue to trend up. As far as actual numbers from year to year, we can statement is safe and reliable transportation. So we are continuing to be concerned with that. One thing I will mention to this group here, there's a work zone safety group that we put together back in June. Jay Norris, who heads up our Department of Safety within Tdot, we've got a working group between us, the Tennessee Road Builders, and also the Department of Safety to address concerns and ways we can make the actual work zones themselves for our people as well as the driving public going through those areas, make them a safer place as far as ways we can do that. So that's one thing we're tackling that I wanted to share with you this morning. But at this time, certainly open it up for any questions you may have.
And I'll begin with just a question to follow up there, and then
Okay.
we'll go to others. But of those fatalities, what percentage of those occur in work zones? Or
I can't remember the percentage of it in the work zones. I will tell you this, and this may be more than what you're asking for, and I'm going off memory right now, which is not great. But the uptrend that we have seen this past year in the numbers in the urban areas, it has more to do with speeding. It has less to do with alcohol. It has less to do with age, has more to do with unrestrained. And for whatever reason, Memphis has a high number in the urban areas of fatalities. So that's where we've seen the biggest numbers increase this past year in trying to understand those numbers.
And I was just curious because you mentioned there's that special task force looking at the work zone, and obviously one is too many because those are totally preventable accidents.
Yes,
But was just curious what segment of those fatalities might fall into that category. So first on my list, I have Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner and team for being here today. You actually, I was fixing to brag on those Tennessee Tech engineers just because I see Paul Degg sitting there, but then you mentioned one young man there, Jay Norris. It's also a Tech grad, a good friend of mine. I appreciate the work you guys are doing. I noticed the governor included an additional $85 million in the budget for the Transportation Equity Fund as it relates to rail. I guess the question is what normally do we collect in that fund, and how do we spend that money generally?
I'll start, and then I'll pass it over to Preston. That goes in his bureau. As far as what we collect on the rail side, not very much. In the last several years, well under $1 million. This year, we collected 2 million of rail revenue, and then an extra 39 of the back payment that we talked about. But what this 85 is meant to address, and I'll turn it over to Preston, is there was an assessment done by Preston's folks of the needs assessment, and it came to well over $300 million. But to get rail up to a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit for trains and get the bridges in good shape, that's really what it was. So I don't know if you want to expand.
Excuse me, Preston Elliott, Chief of Environment and Planning. So as Joe's mentioned, the revenues that come to the short line program are from the Transportation Equity Act. And it's a program that the state of Tennessee has been doing since about the 80s. And over the last about 7 years, as a result of various litigations, the funding sources have not been quite reliable. And in fact, I think in a few slides that Joe showed, there was an infusion of dollars, and that was some back payments from the class ones on the short line program. So the last time a needs assessment was undertaken was in 2005, and we just recently completed one this last year. And what that does is it looks at there's 21 short lines throughout the state of Tennessee with 16 authorities. And just as a note, they touch about 33 rural counties and 9 distressed or at-risk counties. So the needs assessment looked at a variety of aspects. It looked at the speed that trains can travel. It looked at the track condition in terms of their ability to carry a certain weight. And then it also looked at the structural aspects as it relates to the bridges that are across the state. And so of the 817 miles of short line rail system throughout the state of Tennessee, we find that about 51% of them can have speeds of about 10 miles an hour. Now, if you want to be able to get a little bit faster on your freight travel, the next level up is about 25 miles an hour. And so that's about only about 46% of that short line system does that today. As it relates to that capacity, as I mentioned to you, in terms of weight, it's a number called 286. It's a tonnage of weight that can be carried across, and we find about 41% of that system doesn't meet that threshold, as an example. And then the last part on the structures, as I mentioned to you, there's 3 categories. There's poor, fair, and good. And the fair and poor account for about 61%. So when you take into consideration those aspects of condition, that equates to about $291 million worth of need. So let me back up to the 2005 study. How we distributed those dollars were largely based on those needs. And those needs are essentially maintenance. So what we're talking about here is that 85 million is allowing for us to catch back up on deferred maintenance. Essentially because we haven't had that reliable, steady revenue source.
Well, I'm happy to see that you're investing additional dollars in the system. I know Chair Lady Weaver has a bridge on the rail that you have to cross before you can get to 3 or 4 other districts to the east, and so it's good that we're doing that. You mentioned that a $305 million assessment as it related to making the repairs that are necessary based upon the assessment. So would it be fair to say that this only gets us a third of the way there? Or?
Sorry. It depends on how you look at it, but in essence, you could look at it that way. I mean, the revenue that comes in is intended to address maintenance needs. So we're going to have annually maintenance obligations, but in essence, yes. Yes.
I guess, sorry, I've got one more question. You stated, or we saw in the Transportation Equity Fund, there was $143,000 that came in tax revenue, but it also, that revenue last year dropped to $41,000. I guess my question is that a byproduct of decisions that we make, or is it COVID related, or why do you see the big variant there? Do we expect to see it come back up, or is it going to be there again?
So as we discussed before, so as Preston mentioned, so we are enjoined from collecting on the rail side because of the 2 lawsuits. There's a lawsuit on the original sales tax that's still ongoing. We're hoping it's going to be resolved soon. And then on the new cents per item, the 17 cents. So we do today, there is $30 million or so in an escrow fund waiting to be distributed, but it will not be distributed to Tdot until we get resolution of those lawsuits. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today. Speaking of lawsuits, Tdot is involved with 2 lawsuits involving Class 1 railroads regarding tax on diesel fuel. Do we know exactly can you tell us where we're at on these lawsuits and how much revenue is either being withheld or taxes associated with that litigation?
Joe, you want to?
Sure, sure. So the original rail tax was was a sales tax, a percentage, and that I think has been Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we've got favorable reviews on that, but it's not completely solid yet. On the current excise tax, it's still ongoing. So we're enjoined from bringing those to Tdot. So there's about 30.1 million in escrow today.
Yeah, I think just to be clear, the lawsuit was on the original tax was brought. It was an equity issue that the Class 1 rails sued over. This body, the Tennessee General Assembly, changed the law as a result of that lawsuit. So we believe that, as it goes through the courts, that we're going to get a favorable ruling on the original lawsuit, but it's just not done yet. But if we do get a favorable ruling, we're not going to have to, then we don't have to pay back a bunch of money. We should get a one-time sum of maybe $30 million or so. The second lawsuit is still fairly early, I guess, if you will, in the process, and it takes years to go through that. We're largely powerless, just at the mercy of the courts, if you will, for it to work its way through.
Next on my list, Representative Garrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here. You all have a massive amount of personnel, a massive amount of projects dealing from the federal government all the way down to our cities and local counties. And I just appreciate the work that you all do. What an enormous responsibility that you provide on behalf of our state. So thank you very much for that. My question deals with airports. And you all know that the governor has recommended in his budget a $40 million non-recurring cost for some grants or from money for our local airports. And I was just kind of curious of how those funds might be distributed to the local airports.
Well, our aeronautics group will distribute those funds, and they've gone through and they've got a study. They're also working through a resurfacing program. So part of that economic study that we just shared recently, we've got the information through that as far as what our needs are to either increase the level of the quality of our general aviation airports or keep them trending, treading water basically. So this money that we're going to get, the 40 million, will be split between the air carriers getting 20 million and the general aviation getting 20 million. So we've got about 65 or so general aviation airports across the state. So 20 million will not really get us trending upwards as far as the maintenance of the of the paving out there, the hangars, and et cetera that are out there. So it's we're just going to keep continuing treading water, but the 20 million will certainly be put to good use, though.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of follow-ups. Will that be a grant-based program for our local general aviation programs? There'll be a grants where they can apply to.
Yeah.
So, okay. Then finally, I guess, is there any overlap in the funds for the federal COVID relief that are providing any money toward this 40 million or the 20 million for this particular budget item?
We did get some money through COVID, but it was only about 4 million, Joe?
Right. So on the CARES Act, 125 came to Tennessee, 4.5 million came to the general aviation airports. That was mostly for operating expenses, keeping salaries, keeping cleaning supplies and whatnot. On the coronavirus I didn't mention that, and I should have probably done that. So the CRRSSA, the Coronavirus Relief Act, 43.9 came to the state of Tennessee, 42.8 came to the major airports, the air carrier airports, 1.1 came to general aviation. So it's a very small amount, but again, every little bit helps for our general aviation.
Thank you very much, Tim.
So I'll expand on one thing. Our aeronautics group, just like we deliver roads and bridges, our aeronautics group works with all those general aviation airports across the state, helping them through the process of the grants that they can receive out there, what money is available, and helping them with the quality of the projects that they're putting in out there. So I wouldn't say there's oversight, but there's a lot of work that our group does with them just to help them through that process.
Great. Commissioner, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very
Yes,
much
sir.
for your questions. Madam Chair, thank you.
Chairman Whitson.
Thank you, Chair Lady. And this kind of follows up too on the aviation. There was an Aeronautics Economic Development Fund. The governor allocated 10 million non-recurring dollars for this fund, and with the aim to impact job creation and investment opportunities in our general aviation industry through grants to local airports. Two questions. First of all, is how many grants will likely be given with this funding? And is there a requirement for matching funds or to secure other funding for these grants?
So as far as the number of grants, I'm not sure, Chairman. I don't know how many. If you want the stats on the previous, because we had 3 previous aeronautics economic development funds, one for 30, one for 20, and one for 6. So I can give you that information. So I have no idea how many people will apply for the 10 million. What was the other question?
The other one, would there be a requirement
yes.
for matching funds
Yeah,
or other resources?
Correct. So we have a 90-10 match, that 90% state, 10% local match.
I see. Follow-up question? Thank you, Madam Chairman. In the budget questionnaire you submitted to the committee, Tdot lists a reserve balance for the Aeronautics Economic Development Fund of around 41 million. Or 42 million, excuse me. And of this, 19.7 million is unobligated. Does that mean these funds have yet to be awarded, or you just not have yet been spent?
Right. So on the Aeronautics Economic Development Fund, you're talking about that 41 million?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So half of that is for Oak Ridge. 19 million is for Oak Ridge. That has not been obligated on any projects yet.
Okay. And Commissioner, I just want to tell you, I really enjoy working with your team, especially your legislative team. They've been very responsive, and look forward to seeing you guys in committee this year.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, next on the list is Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner, and your team. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the work that you do and have done. The slide that we had on the FAST Act, can you give me that breakdown one more time? We've extended it. It was set to expire on the prior federal fiscal year, but it's been extended for a year. What kind of an impact is that having on our budgeting, and are we in danger of losing any federal revenues should we not be ready to spend it all?
Okay. So yes, it's a good question, Chairman. So it was extended 1 year. So it was supposed to expire September 30th of 20. It's now going to expire September 30th of 21. What they did was, and we kept this in our budget, we anticipated that they would kick the can down the road and the funding in 21 would be equivalent to fiscal 20. And so that's what we've done. We have, as far as we're aware of, there's no danger of losing any federal funds. We are hopeful, as we said in the presentation, we have some backstop funding to fill some of the gaping holes from our user fee collections at the state side. We're hopeful for a stimulus package too from the Biden administration, but that hope springs eternal right now.
If I could follow up. Thank you, Madam Chair. As we look at this as well, hope springs eternal. I understand the optimism there. So I want to go to another slide where we're talking the discussion items /state. And we did talk briefly about the Fix It First program, 360 million to 430 million. What's the source of those funds? And if you mention it, forgive me, but what's the source of those funds?
Well, the source of the funds, those are state funds. So, but we have of that 430 million, about 100 million is state and about 330 is federal. So what we do each year, when Paul and all of us put the 3-year plan together, we pull that money off the top. But again, there's 330 on the federal side, about 99 to 100 million on the state side. And that's actually broken up into, this year, be about 280 million on resurfacing and about 150 on bridge repair.
And last follow-up, I promise, Madam Chair, as we're talking about the potential over collections and as we're looking to close out this budget, are we looking to utilize those facility maintenance dollars with any of our road facilities? And I know we're talking about a lot of capital improvements to buildings, to higher ed buildings and things of that nature. Are we having discussions about any transportation facilities that need some ongoing maintenance and improvements?
It's a good question, and thank you. That's actually part of the governor's mission, is to cut our deferred maintenance. And so this year, we put $16 million into the facilities. So we spread that across the state, whether it's in Strawberry Plains, in Memphis, in Jackson, in Middle Tennessee. We've got $16 million worth of improvements to our state facilities across the state. Thank you.
You want to say something?
Chairman Faison.
I'm all right. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentlemen, good to see y'all today. Hope you're well. I was here when the Improve Act passed, and if I remember right, Paul, Commissioner, there was close to 1,000 projects that were in the actual Improve Act. And there was a project in all 95 counties in Tennessee that were part of that.
That's correct.
Can you bring us, the committee, up to speed? Are we on track? Are we behind? Where that bill that we passed called the Improved Act, where are we at in Tennessee, and where are y'all at? How's it looking?
Sure. So just to give you kind of a where we're at, there were 962 specific projects listed. I will note that the legislation also directed us to maintain a state of good repair with resurfacing programs and things of that nature. But of the 962 projects, and there's been a few that we've had to kind of break up into smaller pieces. So there's 1,021 project segments out of the 962. We have 320 of them were in the engineering phase. 90 of them were in right-of-way, 92 in construction. We've completed 122 of them, and about 397 we have not started yet. And when I say not started, we have not budgeted the engineering work. We are doing the conceptual work on those projects to get so when we're ready to budget the engineering, that we can go right to work and we don't have to start from scratch. So if you do the math, that's about 61% of the projects are either underway or completed right now. Your question about on track to answer that question, the legislation that was passed is not indexed to inflation. And so we're seeing about 5% inflation a year in transportation programs. So it's hard for us to put a hard completion date, but at the time we were thinking that probably between 15 and 20 years to deliver the projects. Here we are going into the fourth year of its implementation, and we're at 60%. So I think that we're doing well in meeting the objectives that the General Assembly put forth in the legislation, and I feel pretty good now. If we can find, one-time money grant programs, we have been successful in the last several years. There have been several grant programs on the federal side that we've applied for. Lamar Avenue in Memphis, for instance, was, it was included in the Improve Act, and we were able to get a $71 million grant. Now it's a $300 or $400 million project, but $71 million is a lot of money. So we keep moving forward and using some of the tools that the General Assembly has provided us through some different alternative delivery aspects to help try to get these projects going quickly.
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner and team. Thank you guys for being here. Question related to electric vehicles. Back when I was on transportation and in the 109th, that was actually a topic of conversation. Teams were bringing electric cars in, so auto driving cars. And we were discussing the loss of revenue and how we plan for that. Can you update us on what is the registration fee for an electric car? I think is it $150? Is that
It's
right?
$100.
$100, which obviously doesn't come anywhere close to covering the loss of gas with that particular vehicle. So can you tell us what planning and updating and what is being done to prepare us for this continued diffusion now that we've got F-150s, Tahoes, these larger vehicles that are electric? What are we doing to prepare for that loss of revenue?
So just to put it in perspective, as far as cars and light duty trucks, the fleet in Tennessee is over 6 million. As of the end of fiscal 20, the electric fleet was 6,400. So 0.1% penetration. Now we've worked with the University of Tennessee on their projections, and they're a little strong as far as where they think we're going to start to see impact. It'd be fiscal 25, fiscal 26. So we're keeping an eye on it right now. There's really not much we can do as far as revenue. I mean, we will have to recognize it and lower our budgets. But at this point, the infiltration of electric vehicles has not been great in Tennessee, but it will be, as many people like GM are going to stop producing combustion engines in 2035. So it's just a matter of time. But at this point, we're keeping a close eye on it. There has been really no impact on the revenue so far.
So-
I will add one last thing. Your statement is absolutely accurate. So as far as an electric vehicle generating a $100 vehicle registration fee, if you take a look at the average vehicle in Tennessee, that vehicle, as far as federal and state taxes, would be somewhere around $290 to $300 a year. That assumes a 13,500 mile usage and 21 miles per gallon as far as average miles per gallon.
So I will tell you this, we're having a lot of that conversation at the federal level with the USDOT and Federal Highway, and also our trade group, which is ASHTO, that represents all 50 DOTs across the state. There are a couple of states, Oregon is one of them, Utah is one of them. They're going through a pilot program to maybe go through a vehicle miles traveled type system to keep up with your mileage. So it wouldn't matter whether you're an electric vehicle or a gas vehicle, you would be solely based on your vehicle miles traveled within the state every year. So they're going through those pilot programs. A big issue out there is Big Brother and people checking on people and how many, where they're going and all that kind of stuff. There's a huge concern at one point, sometime in the near future, because as you know, GM and other ones are switching to EVs a lot sooner than we're expecting. And the state of Tennessee is probably the largest producer of EVs in the country with the manufacturers that we have in this state right now. So that's something that hits home to us. And Joe's right, we only got 6,500 cars. But that's going to change very rapidly in the near future. And we're really pressing in with the new administration and with the new Secretary of Transportation that we need some leadership at the federal level for them to go to VMT, to help us to go to VMT. For all the different states to do something different, and they're not doing something at the federal level, is really going to be tough on all the different states. So it's going to come sooner rather than later, as I said before, and we're actively in those conversations and having that same conversation with our senators and congressmen also. So.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that question, Chairman Zachary, because I think that is a big elephant in the room that we're going to have to address sooner rather than later. Next on my list, Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good to see you all today. Good to see you, Commissioner, and all your staff. And let me just begin by saying that I can certainly speak for Region 4. They did a phenomenal job plowing the roads and getting us back in good shape from the snow. However, as you all know better than I do, once you have big snow like that and you plow those roads, you get 1,000 potholes. In addition to some of the projects in the rural areas of West Tennessee that really needed to be worked on before all that happened. So what are the plans right now for, I guess, immediate potholes as well as bringing some of those rural areas. Someone mentioned the Improve Act, and a lot of folks still thought when they paid that gas tax, it meant they were going to immediately get some of their roads fixed. We knew that wasn't the case, but they kind of, and so we're still getting calls about some of the rural areas, rural highways, and the rural part of the state. Anything in the hopper to start working on some of those projects right away?
I'll make this comment as far as the project spread out, and we talked about projects in all 95 counties. I know Paul and his group and Joe, we all go through, and we've started that process now, developing that 3-year plan that we're going to bring to you for approval.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul and his group does a really good job from my perspective in trying to spread that money out, basically 25% between all the 4 regions. And we've got the Improve Act. We know what those 962 projects are. And it's the governor's intent that we try and knock out and build those 962 projects as fast as we can. And our only limitation there is the money that we receive that Joe has spoken about earlier today. But, and even taking a look between the dollars spent between rural and urban, it's about 50% between, it may differ by 1%, but it's basically 50-50 every year. So I think what we're trying to do and what we are doing is being smart with that money, prioritizing those projects, metrics as far as safety on them, keeping our roads in good repair, how it helps out the community, and trying to get those to those projects as soon as we can. But, you know, of those 962 projects, there's 10 projects at the end of the day that are going to be at the end, and those people are not going to be happy. But, you know, being a debt-free state, we can only go so far with the monies that we spend each year. So, and on the potholes, I mean, we're trying, as soon as our guys got through working around the clock, pushing all the snow and ice off the road, they were back on potholes the next day. So it's going to be a full court press. And with the impact that we had in Middle Tennessee and West Tennessee, which sometimes we don't see that impact from snow and ice, but we've had it wholly across the state this year, there's going to be a big input. And the patches that we put in right now are coal patches. So they're not long-term, but until those asphalt plants coming up, and when we have an area that's got a lot of potholes together, we're going to mill that whole area up and just repave that area. But where we can, with the hot mix when we come, we're going to try and patch those holes best we can as soon as we can with the right materials. Paul, I don't know if you want to have anything to that.
Well, you know, Representative, the equity issue is very much on our mind. So we look at where the people live in Tennessee and where the roads are in Tennessee. And it's very important that we balance that. So one of the things that when we put our resurfacing program, we put our 3-year program with the large projects together, we're trying to get that balance across the state. So we look both the geographical spread across the state and the urban and rural mix. And so it is very important, but to be honest, when we do it right, that just means everybody complains that, where's my project? And so we're just trying to be smart about it. And when it comes to the potholes, I think the commissioner kind of explained the first thing we do is get out there and try to get them filled up with something. About mid to late March, depending on the weather, the asphalt producers will be able to open up their plants. There's a few of them open right now, but by and large, they shut those down in the wintertime. And we'll be able to get, when we get hot mix in, we'll be able to do more permanent patches.
Yeah, follow up. Thank you. Well, Paul, first of all, you know, we like to just bug you, you know, that's part of what we like to do, but I appreciate that. I did want to ask, how much involvement do the road builders get in the pothole part, or do they just do the paving? Is there, or do they help y'all do all of that?
So I would say we've got 3 basic tools that we use. So as far as just patching potholes, that's our maintenance crews patching potholes. When we get out of the winter weather, we have our traditional highway letting. So for instance, interstate resurfacing work, we let those projects in December. So they're already on the books. and we'll start as soon as the weather breaks. State routes, we let those in the February, so we've already awarded a lot of February work for this summer. So for February and March, we'll let a lot of contracts. We will have another round of resurfacing contracts in the June, July lettings. But then the third piece is through the Department of General Services, we have basically a commodities contract we call our on-call contract. And it works two ways. We've got some staff that can do light paving if I need to do a small patch somewhere. And then we also have this in-place contract to where these are maintenance dollars, to where we contract directly with contractors through this type of contract. And it's a per ton, per mile haul method. So really 3 or 4 different tools we use to try to allow us to get out there quickly. But also the long-term fixes are scheduled in advance of the weather as well.
Well, thank y'all for what you're doing on the Jackson project. We appreciate it very much. And again, thank you for what you do. Thank you.
Next up is Chairman Todd.
Thank you, Chairman Baum. Commissioner, appreciate you and your team being here today. And I think my comments generally are probably for Deputy Commissioner Deggs, and they revolve around the safety that was mentioned earlier and some observations that I've had. So the response I guess I'm looking for here is not a lot of specifics, but just to know that you're aware and looking into these issues. One is bridge approaches, and I've talked to some of your staff already about some things I have observed primarily on 840 and on 269 around Memphis, and how rough these bridge approaches are, and it literally littered with trailer parts following those approaches. And it's just disconcerting for me to see that and then to experience it. I was hauling a refrigerator to my son in Huntsville, Alabama several months ago, and really debated hard about going around 840. And I had to take it extra slow and still had to stop a couple of times to retie the unit because it was so rough going over these approaches. And I'm not in some beater pickup truck. So that's a concern. And I don't know if that comes into design or specifications. But that's really what I'm asking for, is for you to really review that and look at how, and I know that's years ago that these were put in, 269 not all that long ago, and it's been pretty rough since day one, and so that's a concern. Also, work zones have been mentioned, and I've noticed the transition lanes and ramps in some of the work zones. The paving and just the angles are kind of rough from the standpoint of a driver. And I just would like for you to look into that a little bit and see if those are being done in the best manner best manner that they can be, so that people can properly make those transitions and safely get through those zones. The other thing is spot repairs, I guess I'll call it. I've noticed on 840 specifically and a few other places where some problem spots have been supposedly repaired, where they'll go in and excavate or do something to a spot that's been rough for some time, breaking up, sinking, whatever it might be. And I have questioned whether the repair was any better than the problem that was supposed to fix. I don't know if those are primarily done by Tdot crews or by contract, but again, that may come back to design and specifications and follow up to make sure that those are done properly and that the taxpayers are getting the best bang for their buck. I know all of these members on this committee are no different than myself. We get a lot of comments about things like that as people go over these spots and they see a contract or contractor possibly working on them and then come back later and find that they really hadn't gotten anything for their money. And that's a concern. So that's really just more of a comment, not necessarily expecting any kind of a response here, but just long-term looking at exactly how these specifications are written, how the contracts are let, and then how the inspections and follow-up might be done.
Sure.
Thank
So
you.
just as a real quick response, so certainly we from a high-level safety standpoint, we have what's called a strategic highway safety plan, where we look at the data out there, where are crashes occurring, where are fatalities occurring, and what are the cause, and we have action plans for the the various types. You have, and we work with the Department of Safety and others as well. So we're looking at the various different, if it's an intersection safety, if it's a median crossovers, if it's pedestrians, there's a lot of different areas that we focus on. As far as the construction defect issue, I will note that bridge ends are an issue all across the country. And we've made decisions in Tennessee we have a lot of what we call jointless bridges. You don't hear the ka-thump, 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 if you will, when you go across a lot of our bridges. And so our bridges expand and contract, and that causes issues at the abutments. We have, if you notice some of the work, we're pulling the bridge ends up on a lot of State Route 840. We know it is a particularly difficult facility for these types of issues. But I can look across the department network. For instance, concrete bridges poured in the 1950s, the constituents in the concrete, those are crappy bridges. The bridge decks come apart. We put a lot of energy on those. So there's decisions that are made on the specifications when projects are built that sometimes you have to deal with for many years. We are looking specifically at 840, and you might have noticed some contracts out of those bridge ends to do that. As far as the type of work, sometimes it's contract work, sometimes it's done with internal department staff. Some of the issues we're experiencing on 840 are those some pretty large fills out there, and those fills sometimes move. And so sometimes all we can do is a temporary patch, and we would have to, literally dig the whole road up to do a complete repair. So we get those complaints too. Trust me, I get them personally as well, and we know it's an issue, and we know the taxpayers of Tennessee want high quality roads. I will note that comparatively, while we might have a road here and there